Welcome to a new episode of Conversations with Cohen. I'm your host, Greg Cohen, and I'm a real estate advisor at Cressa in New York City. As you know, I've been having a lot of conversations with my clients who are in the law firm space, and a number of issues, struggles keep on coming up. So I thought I'd create a podcast to help bring on the subject matter experts and problem solvers helping law firms today with a number of those struggles. Today, I'm pleased to have as my guests Loeb Leadership, Natalie Loeb, and David Robert. As I like to do at the beginning of every episode, Natalie, would you be so kind to introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for inviting us, Greg. We're happy to be here today. Always happy to talk about topics that impact law firms and hopefully to make a difference. My name is Natalie Loeb. I am the CEO and founder of Loeb Leadership. We are I'd say a full service consulting firm now as we have grown. I see Dave nodding his head, right? I'm used to introducing ourselves as a management and leadership development firm, but we're really a full suite of consulting services now. And over half of our clients are law firms. So certainly this is a space that I've played in for over, I hate to say 30 years now. And now me and Dave and our team play in this space. A little bit about Loeb Leadership. We're a certified woman-owned business. I'm really proud of it. I started it 24 years ago, and now we have grown to have a full-time staff of 7 and over 50 consultants that help us globally do 3 things: training, coaching, one-on-one executive coaching, and workplace culture work. And I will say over the past experience during COVID, although we were certainly working with clients around culture work prior to COVID, during this time, our culture practice has exploded. And so we're really happy to be here and talk to you about it and be helpful in any way that we can.
Thanks for being here, Natalie. And David, if you'd be kind enough to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Great. Thanks for having me, by the way. I appreciate it. So as you mentioned, my name is Dave Robert. I'm the Chief Talent Strategist at Loeb Leadership. I'm sort of the culture expert on the team. I have 20 plus years of working almost exclusively on workplace culture and trust. And as Natalie said, since the pandemic started, I think more and more law firms are realizing the importance of making this intentional investment in culture and in trust as well. So I am very excited about the conversation today on the podcast.
So let's just jump right into it. As you know, here we are. We're 2 years into the pandemic. And folks are either working at home or they're working hybrid. They're working something that's not in the office most of the time. And the longer this goes on, the more I hear from law firm leadership. How do I keep people? How do I retain my talent? And they say that because by being away from the office, or they're feeling that their associates, their partners are removed from the firm because they're working in front of a screen and not amongst colleagues. And as a result, how do they keep their talent from just moving to the highest bidder?
Sure. It's a lot there to unpack. So let's start with the first part around retaining talent. So one of the things that is really important as we're advising our clients around intentional culture, and again, I'm a little bit biased. When I'm working on workplace culture, I'm really kind of approaching it through the lens of trust and trust between managing partners and senior leadership and the rest of the organization, for sure, but also trust with the organization and the clients in which they're working. There has to be that sort of level of trust. And so to build that trust, the first thing is you have to be authentic. So if you say you care about your people, you have to demonstrate that, right? So it's not just words. You actually have to behave in a way and take actions and make choices that actually demonstrate that you truly care about the people that work for you. And I think we saw during the pandemic that there was a wide variation of decision-making and behaviors coming out of not just law firms, I think organizations in general. Some leaders I thought were, very, very, very good about making authentic, genuine gestures towards their people. And there were other leaders who fumbled. And I think they were the ones who suffered the highest turnover rates. So first thing is authenticity. The second thing I would say is, you have to continue to create a sense of belonging. And again, sounds easy when I say it, but it's tough work. And it kind of leads into the second part of your question too, which is, how do you actually create and reinforce a sense of connection when we are relegated to our home offices and, for at least the foreseeable future. And the fear is that, associates in particular will feel less and less connected to the firm they're working for, and therefore could be seduced maybe to go to a firm across town for more money. I get that the hybrid work environment, the home office work environment is a challenge, but it's not an excuse for doing the hard work. And so whether you are physically together in an office or whether you are dispersed remotely, the same things have to occur. You have to have FaceTime with the people that work with you, so they can see you, you can read body language, you can check in personally. They have to be very clear about what your expectations are of them. And you can't do that via an email or a note. It has to be done through a Zoom session, as an example. They have to understand how their contribution is continuing to help the firm and the firm's clients. I think we sometimes make an assumption that associates and other folks get that just naturally through osmosis, but I think you have to remind them, how their work and their contribution on a day-to-day basis is connected to the greater good. It's a huge part of a sense of belonging, and I think you have to acknowledge that people are stressed out. I think I heard the word burnout. I think we have to acknowledge that we've all had challenges. Managing your work and your life responsibilities has always been a challenge. And the pandemic has, I guess, exacerbated and amplified those challenges and created some new ones as well. And I think we have to acknowledge that people are struggling and they might not feel comfortable raising their hand and saying, hey, I need help. I'm on the edge of burnout. I'm panicking here, right? So I think as a leader, it's appropriate to check in with people. How are you doing? How can I help you? Right. And Natalie, you're coaching all the time.
Well, as you're saying that, David, you could see me here biting, to say something. So thank you for taking that breath and noticing that. I appreciate it, because everything you said is absolutely true. And so let me just tell you, as a coach, so I lead the coaching practice now at Loeb for 2022, which I'm very excited about. But what over the years, and more recently, and particularly through the pandemic, I have received so many calls from associates at law firms that are unhappy. So what do? They call a coach, right? And they want to start talking through, should I stay here? Is it the right place for me? Everyone's miserable. And so those are the signs, right, of the burnout, or not feeling valued, or not feeling, they want to leave. So of course, our job is not to tell them, how to leave. Our job is to try and help them figure out, is this the right place for them? And if they stay, what does that look like? So what do you need? And so as I dive deeper, and for example, this happened very recently, one of the third years, at a large law firm, very talented, basically what he was telling me is that he works for a partner where he really feels that all the work he does, he just doesn't understand at all how it fits into the big picture. He's not getting any mentoring or coaching from this partner. He's really just, and again, feeling more disconnected since he is remote. And what he's looking for is to learn more about the business, learn about more of the business of law, learn more about the client's business that he's working for, and he's not getting any of that. So if he were, and if that partner were doing some of the things that David was talking about, first of all, that emotional part, by how are you, a little bit of that, what we might call chit chat or whatever it is, just let people know you care about them. That's one piece of the equation. The other piece is what about, how are you helping this lawyer to be a better lawyer? How are you helping this associate to grow and to become a better lawyer? Now, listen, we've always been preaching that even before the pandemic, but even more now, people are reevaluating their lives. And if you think they're not, you're wrong. Okay. People are thinking about, is this where I want to be? Is this where I want to contribute my talent? And am I going to stay? And so certainly our business has gotten busier than ever. And we're talking this through a lot, not just the senior leaders, with associates. And I'm going to say third year, fourth year, fifth year, and senior associates, all of them, we're getting these calls. So it's important to be thinking about, right? To what extent am I doing these types of things that David is mentioning? I want to mention one other thing, and then I'm going to pause, David, and pass it back to you. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of being on a virtual conference. I don't know who's familiar with this or not, but you should be if you're in the legal industry. The Institute for Wellbeing in Law. It is a wonderful nonprofit that has been built by Ann Bradford and Brene Buchanan, and they're concerned about the mental and emotional well-being of lawyers. And they put together this very powerful task force and sponsored by over 30 law firms already in their first conference. It was phenomenal. Our opening speaker yesterday was Martin Seligman, and he is the grandfather, as you may or may not know, of positive psychology. and he's out of the University of Pennsylvania, very well known. Some of you on the call may know him. But I was fascinated to see him opening up this conference and talking about positive psychology and talking about something called agency, and how he defined agency is the presence of the mental state that I can make a difference. And he was reminding all the people there, to what extent do leaders of law firms remind everyone of the importance of the work that they do. And he was reminding everybody about the importance of the law, and that really is meaningful work. And I can tell you right now that gets lost to many associates in the day-to-day grind of the work that they're doing. There's a disconnect. But if their partners were able to somehow remind them of the importance and the meaningfulness of the work, of the law, no matter what side they're on, they're going to help create that connection that this work is purposeful and meaningful, and then help the lawyers, their associates, grow into that and become better lawyers. It was really interesting to watch this. It was the first time I've seen Martin Seligman lead a conference or be invited to this type of conference. It was wonderful to see him here speaking about it.
So you've given me a lot to taking copious notes here, a lot to dig into, right? So let's start with David, your comment about authenticity. I think we know what the definition of authenticity is, but how do you express? How do you advise law firm leadership to express authenticity to the people that they work with and who work for them? What does that look like in your mind?
Sure. So, the word that comes to mind is being intentional about it, right? So again, I use this message that we care about you as a person, right? We hear that all the time. Right? So when we're interviewing, managing partners, talk about your people. Well, I really care about them. What do you want your legacy to be? I want people to think, to understand that I cared about them as people. Great. So what are you doing to back that up? Talking about it's great, but what are you actually doing on a day-to-day basis that is going to create a perception and a feeling that people have about you, that you actually do care about them? So you really have to be intentional about making sure that what you say can be backed up with action and choices. And oftentimes, I think there's this compelling sense of urgency to say something kind, especially when people are stressed out and suffering, without really thinking through, like, am I able to back this up or not? And an example is, it's really kind of disingenuous to say to your people, I care about you, and then expect them to work 75, 80 hours a week. That's not a demonstration of care at all, right? So, listen, I care about you, but you're going to have to miss your kid's birthday party because I need you on this client engagement. That's not demonstration of care, right? So we have dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of examples of this, right? Now, I'm not saying that, that there's not going to be exceptions to that, right? It's work, and clients do have, needs and demands, and they're paying you to do those things. But those really should be the exception, not the rule. And so again, we have lots of examples of saying one thing and then the reality on the ground has been very, very different, right?
Yeah.
But you can be genuine and still expect folks to work very hard if you define hard as long hours. Right. So what are the actions that someone can take?
We actually, I didn't mean to cut you off briefly. We actually practice this at Loeb Leadership, right? It's a negotiation. It's a conversation that happens about what hard work is, right? So why does the leader get to dictate unilaterally what hard work looks like or feels like, right? So why is it not a conversation and a negotiation around what that looks like and what an associate can reasonably accomplish? And I think that there's an imposition that's imposed on folks, and we either accept it. And I think, to Natalie's point earlier, I think for a long time that system worked. Associates bought into, a law firm culture, and just assumed that was part of the path to become a partner, as an example. And then when the pandemic kind of hit, it kind of rattled people, and it made them realize, like, maybe this is not what I want to do. Maybe this is not the right place for me. And we saw a large portion of the workforce sort of opting out of their current reality, right? So I mean, again, I think when we think about intentional culture, you really do have to understand your words and your actions have to be aligned. It doesn't mean you have to be the nice guy all the time, or it's always a democracy. But I think you have to set realistic expectations and negotiate with your people what the work should look like. And I don't think that happens enough. We do it at Loeb Leadership, right? I mean, I'm on the phone with Natalie all the time and with her husband all the time, talking about what the work should look like, what I can and can't do, what they can and can't do, and then we figure out what the path forward looks like for us.
Yeah. A couple of things I'd like to add to that as you're talking about the two, something you were bringing up about being authentic and hard work and long hours, right? So I do think that we're all relooking at deliverables and making sure work getting done. And we certainly know that the newer workforce wants what they value for the most part is having some flexibility about how they get their work done. And we know that leaders that can depend on and know that work will get done tend to give a little more leeway to those folks because the work is getting done and the deadlines are being met. And if that means someone's working at 2 a.m. because they like to work at 2 a.m, that's their option, right? But if someone has to work at 2 a.m. because they're demanded to work at 2 a.m. every day, that's not an option, right? And then their performance and their will begin to suffer and their emotional and mental well-being. There's no doubt about it. I had a client recently, it was very interesting, a coaching client, a partner who came into the session and said, is it my job to make sure my people are happy? Why do I have to make them happy? And I said, you know what? I think we're using the wrong word here. It's not your job to make them happy. People have to get happy on their own, but it is your job to inspire them to do their best work. So what are you doing to inspire them to do their best work and want to do their best work to follow you, to meet the deliverables you need to meet for your client? That's a different conversation. So sometimes I think, we can get hung up on these words or misinterpret them because a lot of, I will say, baby boomers like myself sometimes think that we're supposed to make generation whatever, Y, X, Z happy. We're not trying to make them happy. They got to make themselves happy. And we all know they're trying to make themselves happy. But it is our jobs as leaders to inspire them to do their best work. And that's the skill there that David's starting to talk about.
And Natalie, I have a client as well, a managing partner, nice guy, right? And he likes to work late hours on the weekends, and he'll zip off a dozen emails to teammates at 2 a.m. on Saturday, on Sunday morning. And his team gets it. It's like, do I respond to it? Do I not respond to it? And then I don't think there's anything nefarious going on. I think he's just getting work done and doesn't realize that when that email lands into someone's inbox, as the managing partner, there is a sense of like, I think I have to.
There's going to be a reaction. Absolutely.
And over time, that creates, it can be a culture of burnout because you are like, wow, I have to be available 24/7 to respond to these emails. And so it could be as simple as saying, I may send you an email over the weekend because I like to work over the weekend, but don't respond. Respond on Monday morning when you come in. It's a simple, just clarifying, the expectation, right? Or just put maybe the delayed send on your email, be taught how to use that. And then all those emails go out at, 7:30, 8 o'clock on Monday morning and the problem's solved. But there's a lack of communication in terms of expectation, which creates false perceptions, and then we behave according to those false perceptions, and then we get into trouble. So, so those are examples of how you actually can demonstrate care just by simply clarifying the expectation, and then you don't have some of that drama that gets kicked up because people think you're asking for unreasonable demands.
And you talked about communication and how to communicate effectively. Do you think that leadership doesn't know how to do it, or are they doing it in a different way than their underlings or their juniors are know how to be communicated to? Where's the disconnect there?
Well, I think it's all the above. Yeah. So I think there is a lack of understanding of best practices in terms of how you give feedback, especially constructive feedback or corrective feedback. It's also, performance management and performance feedback is one of the most intimidating things that leaders have to do. Nobody likes to give negative feedback or constructive feedback. It's uncomfortable. It's awkward. We tend to be very clumsy when we're doing it. And then the person who's receiving the feedback now becomes awkward and anxious, right? So there is an art to giving that kind of feedback. And I think think there's a lot of opportunity for partners and managing partners to understand what that should look like in a best practice perspective. But I also think that again, the older partners that I've worked with, including managing partners, grew up in law firm environments where their feedback was having a stapler thrown at them or being screamed at across the room because they didn't do something the managing partner wanted them to do. And so I think I think people want to be kind and want to do the right thing, but I think there's some confusion because their previous example and their experience was very different than what they know they have to do differently currently. And there's a very difficult jump to make going from experience A to experience B, right? So yeah.
And I would imagine that some of these folks, these managing partners, perhaps see like a focus on wellness as being, pardon lack of a better term, like soft, like that's just not, why do I have to do it this way? And so how do you change their perception? Because it's got to be from their, it's got to help, you've got to help them see what's in it for them, right? Or else you're sort of knocking up against the wall.
Yeah, I will say that the single, well, maybe I'm exaggerating here, but there's some truth to this. The single most important or difficult challenge in our work is convincing those who have the authority to make these types of investments in culture is to convince them that now's the right time to do it, right? So, because oftentimes the main pushback we get from managing partners is, we're making a ton of money. We don't have that high of turnover. People stay here. We have an engagement survey. We get pretty good scores in the survey. So if it's not broken, don't fix it. And which is, a valid perspective. But, our perspective, I always say, trust is like insurance, right? We don't understand the value of it until we absolutely need it. And when you need it and you don't have it, it's too late to get it, right? So don't assume that just because you're making a ton of money and just because people give you nice scores in your engagement survey, because they're sometimes unreliable assessments, that everything's going well, right? So why not make the investment in building trust that you can leverage when other challenges pop up, right? And the second part of that, Greg, is there's so much research. When I was at the Great Place to Work Institute before joining Loeb, we were a global organization. We interviewed 10 million employees a year. We had all that data to sift through. And one of the things that would pop out year after year for almost 30 years is that organizations that invested in intentional trust building and enjoyed a high level of trust, they not only enjoyed lower voluntary turnover, and it didn't even matter what industries that were notoriously high, hospitality, retail, healthcare, enjoyed as much as a third less voluntary turnover than their peers who didn't invest in intentional culture. But they also enjoyed significantly higher financial outcomes. And so again, didn't matter what industry, all those organizations that were certified as great places to work, so they had a high level of trust, outperformed their peers from a financial outcome perspective. And there's so much data that we mined. We actually had a university in California kind of mine for the data, and they validated our own internal research that when you invest in trust, you enjoy lower voluntary turnover and significantly higher financial outcomes. And the financial, I mentioned that because that usually does kind of perk up people's ears, like, right? So I can still make a lot of money while also being generous to my employees. Yes, you can. You can.
So if I'm listening to this and I'm saying, okay, I could buy into that, David. So how do I invest in trust? Like, how do I do that?
Sure. So there's no mystery here at all. There's proven models that are used around the globe around how you actually initiate a long-term effort to build trust in the organization. We use this roadmap in our own clients, but the issue is that you can't skip through it, right? So because then you're going to break trust because people are. folks will realize that you're skipping steps because you want to race through the process, and you're going to end up breaking trust and not building the trust you need, right? So there are behavioral pieces to building trust that we coach. This is why our coaching is so important. We coach leaders how to show up in those micro moments in ways that they're going to build trust more often than they break it. We're human, we make mistakes, but your default should be that you're behaving in a way that builds trust. But there's also, and this is probably the more challenging piece for firms, there's also an infrastructure piece that has to be in place. If you to ask people to change their behavior in a way that's going to facilitate trust building, it's not going to be as effective or sustainable if you don't have the policies and procedures in place that actually support that behavior change. And that, to me, is the more difficult part of culture shift, because a lot of those programs and policies that need to be modified or created are intimidating and threatening to senior leaders, partners, managing partners, because emotionally anchored to those things. Right. And there could be financial implications to those programs and policies as well.
And sounds quite overwhelming. Sounds like quite a mountain to climb. So it's kind of, and so then it's like chicken and egg. So which one do you do first? Do you invest in the policies and procedures? Do you get that framework, or do you deal with the former? So, how do you balance that?
Yeah, in our roadmap, it actually walks you to again, this is not linear work. You kind of move around the roadmap, but you start with the behavioral piece first, right? Here's what I expect of you. Here's what it means to be a partner at the firm. Here's what it means to be a managing partner. Here's what it means to be a business services leader in the firm. These are the behaviors. We call it a behavioral compass. These are the behaviors that are going to guide the work forward, right? Get clear about what that looks like and clear about the consequences for not aligning around that behavior. That is a really important, initial step in a culture shift. And then once you're clear about the behaviors, we can't tell you what those behaviors are. The firm leaders have to establish that. It's your firm, right? So they figure that out. They build that equation. And then once we kind of get clarity on what those behaviors are, we can advise on the types of policies and programs that are more likely to support those behaviors. And then of course we have to do an audit and say, well, what do you currently have? Right? That's either working or not working. And what do you need to create or build in order to support those behavior changes?
And is that coaching one-on-one coaching? Is that group coaching within an organization in yourselves? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'll briefly answer that. I'm sure Natalie has a perspective as well. So it's a combination of two. If you have a firm of 800 associates, obviously, doing one-on-one coaching is not feasible for 800 people, right? So, so there's a lot of group coaching to get everybody aligned, what we're trying to accomplish, what they stand to gain from making the behavior change, so that everybody's rowing in the same direction. But inevitably, there are going to be a handful of people who will be resistors, right? And will dig their heels in, cause a bit of disruption, create barriers to moving the work forward. And when those things pop up, the more appropriate intervention is probably a one-on-one coaching. So they understand kind of the implication of what happens when they show up in those moments in that way. And that's just out of respect for the person. It's usually more appropriate to have that one-on-one conversation.
If I could just add in a little bit here, again, so much that's been said here. So in order to build an intentional culture and evaluate the behaviors that you all agree upon will help to shape that culture, you also have to hold yourselves, each other, and everyone accountable for those behaviors, right? And so as I was mentioning even before this call, I'm using this metaphor now. What did one of my colleagues called it? The get back coach, right? So the get back coach in football who makes sure that one of the coaches doesn't step over the line so the team gets the penalty, right? His job is to pull back that coach. And so what do I mean by that? So people on the senior leadership, people on teams, if behaviors that we're committed to, that we're going to agree upon to create the culture we want, and someone does not abide by that, someone's got to be that get back coach and pull that person back and say, we agreed not to do that. And, and point that out. So what does that also require? It also requires that that person is skilled at feedback, right? Because that's really sharing some information or feel comfortable giving some feedback. Or it's communication, like you started earlier, Greg, right? You talked about communication. So we have to all feel comfortable leaning into that. And then you asked the question earlier, why is it sometimes people don't give feedback? And here's my answer as a coach. And here's what I've noticed over doing training and coaching for years. And I wrote it down here. I wouldn't forget. So there's a number of reasons that people often don't want to give feedback or share information, as I'll say. First of all, it could be they don't like conflict. And if they're conflict avoidance, they're concerned that the feedback is going to create conflict and they don't know how to handle that. So that's a coachable moment and a coachable skill on how to manage conflict or have what we call productive conflict, because we believe in conflict. Healthy organizations have healthy conflict. It creates innovation. Our team at Loeb Leadership has it all the time, and I'm proud of it. So, that's not a reason to not give feedback. You just need to know it, recognize it, and learn how to go through that.
And also, by the way, sorry to interrupt, but I had a good conversation with Fritz, and it's talking about creating a safe space, right?
That's
A safe space so that you can have conflict, but move forward as an organization. So
that's absolutely
that's a key. I would imagine a key component of that.
That's right. And our Dr. Fritz, as we affectionately call him, is masterful at this, helping our clients create those safe spaces. So yeah, because you have to, which is also part of culture, right? It's all connected. Yeah. Another reason often people won't give feedback is I'll say they don't have a roadmap. They don't know how. So what do? We want to give them models. You can Google a model for giving feedback. We have our own models, our TLC model. We use the SBIA model, whatever it might be. But people need to follow this roadmap. And I find, particularly with lawyers that have not really done this before, when you give them a roadmap, they get it. They go, this is easy. I can do this. But now as they're doing it, we also, another reason, sometimes they're concerned about the emotions that it might trigger in somebody else. So now we're getting into that mucky stuff, right? What if I give some feedback and even I give it well and somebody cries or gets defensive or pushes back? What do I do then, right? So we also have to be comfortable, because it's going to happen. We're human beings, and today, particularly during the pandemic and what everybody's been through, there's a good chance you don't know what might pop up when you're giving some feedback and what you may hear. So that's a skill that leaders, people in leadership roles, or anybody that's with a team needs to be able to prepare themselves for and be skilled at if they're going to help move people into the future here and through where we're headed next. So these are all coachable items. Or training items for groups or coaching groups that we can discuss with each other to help people lean into this. And I'll stop now, Dave. I'm sorry.
I want to go back to thank you, Natalie. I want to go back to what Greg said about, wow, this could, if I was a managing partner, this could look overwhelming and intimidating, right? When you see this big roadmap around building trust, right? And we hear that quite a bit, right? Because it is a lot of work. But my response would be, if I got that question posed to me by a managing partner, I would say, well, your firm has a culture today.
That's
and
right.
you played a role in building that culture. Did you feel overwhelmed and intimidating, in the process of building the culture you have today? And the answer we get all the time is, never even thought about it, right? So it's only intimidating because you're being intentional about it, right? So and it becomes a priority for you. So and you're not doing everything at one time, right? So the science behind culture shift is chunked out in a way that it's not overwhelming, because you're not biting off more than you can chew. You're doing it in very thoughtful, meaningful, strategic ways in order to get from where you are today to this aspirational future where you want to go in the
and where the talent wants to flow to.
Right.
You get there and the reputation on the street becomes that, and the people within the organization are going to sell your organization themselves, and they're going to want to bring people to that organization, talented people, and that's how you'll attract and retain the top talent that you're looking for.
So
go ahead.
Go ahead, Natalie, unless.
Well, I just want to add one last piece about that, which I think is really important, because if you're going to attract and retain top talent, think about that top talent wants to be around other folks that are committed to the culture and the way we're working together. So if you're not holding people accountable that aren't consistent with the culture, you're allowing low performers and mediocre performers to hide out and get the same benefits, rewards as the top talent. I'm just telling you, your top talent is not going to hang on very long. They're going to go somewhere else. So you really have to pay attention to this.
So then go ahead, David.
Yeah, I mean, the word retention and kind of, I get, because, there are leading indicators of being on the right path, and then there are lagging indicators. Retention is a lagging indicator, right? So it's an output, it's a result of something. And so, if a firm is focused on retention, they might be missing the details of the leading indicators around, associate engagement, right? Creating a sense of belonging, right? We talked about we alluded to this, like the congruency of why somebody became an attorney and the type of work they're working on currently today, right? And if there's a lack of congruency, then they're more apt to consider leaving that firm and going somewhere where the work is more congruent with their needs or their desires, right? So again, if I were a managing partner, retention is important, but don't focus on that because that's not actionable. There's a bunch of stuff that has to happen internally to cause that outcome, right? So, but again, we hear all the time, retention. It's like, okay, great. That's the result. That's the aspiration. What are you doing to actually get to that result? And that's where people get confused.
So then the final question is, how do people get in touch with Loeb Leadership to be able to learn more and engage with you folks?
That's a great question. Thank you. Well, certainly, we've been working really hard at this, and I was so happy to get a new client today that came in through coaching that they found us when they Googled executive coaching on the metro area. But you can find us at our website, which is loebleadership.com, LOEB leadership.com. And on the site now, David, I know we've been updating the site where people can put in some inquiries, and we pride ourselves on being very responsive. I mean, that's a great way to get to us. Would be our site. I'm on LinkedIn. David's on LinkedIn. You can always message us there. We're happy to respond. Our job is to be responsive. And as you know, Greg, I grew up in law firms, and being responsive is just the way we play the game here. So we're happy to.
Well, thank you both so much. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. This has been an extremely valuable conversation. I'm Greg Cohen. This is Conversations with Cohen, and we'll see you next time.
You got it. Thank you very much, Greg. And Dave, thanks for your time. Appreciate it today. We'll talk to you soon.